Well, a high-stakes meeting in Alaska. These are the pictures of the two leaders, Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, sitting down with their delegation at this point of time. They will be having a one-on-one meeting between the two of them, and then there will be a delegation-level talks happening post that. But the world, it is holding its breath. The U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin sitting down for this pivotal meeting in Alaska amidst the ongoing Ukraine war. The stakes are quite high, with global implications hanging in the balance. Will this meeting bring about a breakthrough, or will tensions escalate? Donald Trump, he has warned Putin of what he says, very severe consequences if Russia does not agree to stop the war, while Putin praises Trump's efforts to end the conflict. There is also a potential three-way meeting involving Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that could follow after this particular meeting, but questions, they still linger about the feasibility of a peace deal. We are getting you the latest developments from this high-voltage summit. Can Trump and Putin break the ice? Will there be a deal, or will the gloves come off? Is this a start of a thaw or a descent into a new sort of a war? We'll try and get all the details from Alaska reporters, especially Maha Siddiqui. She is there on the ground bringing you the drama as it unfolds. All right, let me go across to my guests who are joining at this point of time. Alison Federica, Director of Analysis at Geopolitical Futures, and Dr. Richard Benkin, geopolitical analyst and author. Mr. Benkin, to you first. How do you, there was a very warm handshake, a very enthusiastic handshake between the two world leaders. Decode that for us. How did you view that?
First, thanks for having me on. I really didn't view that as anything of significance one way or the other. I think let's remember a few things. First of all, President Trump made it clear he is not negotiating for Ukraine. There will have to be follow-up negotiations directly between Russia and Ukraine. So the best thing that could possibly come out of this is a ceasefire. And I hope I'm wrong. But I just don't see it happening. From what we hear with all the other people that President Putin has brought, it sounds like his agenda is to kind of take the focus away from what might have to be done to get a ceasefire and try and transfer it to all sorts of wonderful things that could happen in a thaw between Russia and U.S. relations. However, I think the real key here is this. Putin's in kind of a bind. He has staked his personal power, reputation on this adventure in Ukraine, which is not going well. But he can't be seen, he can't let anyone see him as surrendering. At the same time, President Trump's recent threats of secondary sanction. We know that India was the first country to really feel that, and the next will be China. That could have the impact of making it economically impossible for Putin to carry out this war. And so what kind of bind is Putin in, and what will happen? Perhaps he's hoping to find some way to avoid either option in this discussion.
Alison, when we look at that statement from Donald Trump where he says there are going to be severe economic consequences, how should Russia be looking at these statements coming from the U.S. president? Do they just dismiss this as U.S. pressure tactics? How should Russia be interpreting all of this?
So I think what the U.S. wants to make sure is that Russia understands that they are willing to follow through on some of these threats. The challenge that they're facing is that when they've threatened economic sanctions tariffs, for example, they have scaled some of them back or created delays. But with this summit, it really is a lot about a Russia-U.S. relationship, a potential reset, and the sanctions are going to be the key component of what it means for Russia and what it means for the U.S. To the professor's point about the economy in Russia being critical, and can Russia sustain a longer war effort given the state of its wartime economy? So Russia has no choice but to take this very seriously, because a miscalculation on that end would be very catastrophic for the Russian economy and then therefore the political system. And in this particular case, I think the U.S. is fairly serious. They wouldn't have put these tariffs on India if they weren't serious, because India has been a strategic partner for the United States in the past, and you don't put somebody like that in the crosshairs unless you're serious.
Yeah. Dr. Richard Benkin, when we speak about Ukraine's response to all of this, Vladimir Zelensky, he basically calls for US to convince Russia to stop the invasion. How does Kiev look at Trump as a potential deal maker here? Because on one hand, the US president says that he's not here to negotiate a deal on behalf of Ukraine. But how should Ukraine be looking at this meeting? Are they also, in a way, worried about being sidelined in these talks?
Well, I would hope not. I think President Trump has made it clear that he is not going to negotiate for Ukraine. I think, secondly, people who know him and people who've been around him know that he was genuinely angered when he would have these positive conversations with President Putin, and then Russia would continue to target Ukrainian civilians. And I think if you look at how the rhetoric began about this war at the beginning of the Trump administration, I think we've seen a real change. And I think President Trump has really come to recognize that that the problem is not Ukraine, the problem is not Volodymyr Zelensky. And in fact, the other thing is, yes, what the Ukrainian view is, Zelensky agreed a long time ago to come to the table and sit down and negotiate. It was Putin who was blocking that. So I think if I were a Ukrainian, and I'm not, but trying to think about that, if I were, I think I'd look at President Trump as someone who could help my country and who very well might. And if this doesn't work, who is really going to put the hammer down on Russia, which Russia just can't afford at this point.
You know, the fact that Ukraine isn't at the table, and that is also quite significant. We understand that there can be a three-table meeting that might happen after this particular summit. But Alison, given that Ukraine isn't here, how is this summit being perceived by Ukraine at this point of time? Are they hopeful? How are they viewing this?
So I think they are a little frustrated they have not been included in these talks as they expected to be. They need to, I think they've reached out to the Europeans. The Europeans are also part of this. But something that Ukraine can't openly, I think, admit for political reasons and domestic pressure, military reasons, a lot of their capabilities to continue fighting will come from financial and military assistance from the US, from European partners. So in that sense, a lot of how the US feels about Russia will directly impact how it's going to approach Ukraine. Because what we have seen in that oscillation of how the US rhetoric has changed towards Russia, that in turn has a direct impact on how the US approaches Ukraine. So from the Ukrainian perspective, if there is no deal reached and Putin ends up angering the US greatly and Trump, follows through on his threat to walk away if there's no deal, that potentially could be a very good outcome for Ukraine, because that would make it much more likely to get US and EU continued support in their war effort.
Right. Let me also get you this breaking piece of information that we are getting at this point of time. The House Committee has slammed Donald Trump's sanctions threat, and all of this is amid the Trump-Putin meeting that is taking place. While this meeting is on, Donald Trump, he's facing heat back home. The tariffs on India won't stop Putin is what the House Committee has said. The Democrats, in the meanwhile, they urge the military aid to Ukraine. The committee also calls sanctions, all these sanctions, smoke and mirrors. In fact, Mr. Besant has warned of secondary sanctions on India. Donald Trump had criticized over Russia's strategy, and the House panel is now demanding real action on Putin. The tariff threat is being seen as a misguided move by the House Committee. And my colleague Maha Siddiqui joins us to get us more on this. Maha, how should we view this? The House Committee slamming Trump for the sanctions threat.
Well, they are concerned about the relationship with India. It has been a relationship that was, in fact, described not very long back by the US itself as a highly consequential relationship. And here you have a situation where there is a possibility of a 50% tariff on India, 25% tariff initially, and then an added 25% penalty tariff on India because it has been buying oil from Russia. So India will be carefully watching this meeting today here in Anchorage as well. Because if the meeting here is successful, then the possibility of the penalty tariffs on India of 25% to be dropped is quite high. And that tariff will come into force only on the 27th of August. So there is still some time. If things improve with Russia, between Russia and the United States, then that might be something that would come as a relief to India. Now, clearly, the House committee is talking about the fact that these kind of sanctions against countries that have, in fact, been partners with the United States, like India, will not be able to pressure President Putin if that's what President Donald Trump believes. And that is the sentiment that they have put out in that statement, calling it mirrors and smoke and not really something substantial, punishing for Moscow itself. Though President Donald Trump has on board, when he was coming to Anchorage, said that if the meeting doesn't go his way, then Russia could be faced with much more punishment than it has received from the US. The meeting has already started, and unlike what we were told earlier of a one-on-one meeting, it's now a 3+3 that has already started, with President Putin sitting on one side, President Trump on the other, and the two leaders of theirs sitting facing each other. The leaders from both sides are their foreign ministers, that is Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, and the other leaders present in the meeting are Yuri Ushanov, who's a special envoy, and Steve Witkoff, who's a special envoy for the United States, sitting on the other side. Now, Steve Witkoff had gone to Moscow as well on the 6th of August. That was something that Donald Trump had mentioned on Truth Social. There were also pictures of him walking around in Moscow along with Russian leaders. So clearly, this grouping that we're seeing just now might also come in for a bit of criticism from the U.S. itself, from people within U.S. itself, because Steve Witkoff is essentially a real estate lawyer. And many people believe that his acumen on foreign policy, on conflict resolution, on aspects which are critical to America and in this meeting might not be up to speed. However, of course, he's a person who is chosen by President Trump, and the US president has that power to be able to choose his team. And Steve Witkoff comes as an important person in that team, and he's part of that 3+3. So a 3+3 meeting, not a one-on-one now, which is clear from the visuals that we're getting from inside. We are running those now, I can see on the right-hand side of the television screens, led by a lunch where a larger delegation will join in. We'll have to see who this larger delegation will entail, and then followed by what will be critically watched, a joint press conference.
Right. Ma Siddiqui, stay with us. We'll keep coming back to you as things develop and as we get the latest from that particular meeting. But let me go back to my guests, Alison and Dr. Benkin. Dr. Benkin, I want to talk a little bit about the tariff tantrum of Donald Trump. The US president, he levied a 50% tariff on India. Now, why I talk about this and why I bring this up is because Donald Trump was supposed to have this conversation with Vladimir Putin, which he's having right now. He can't put sanctions and tariffs on China at this point of time because of all the market reasons. Do you feel India was unfairly targeted here? And do you also feel that India putting tariff sanctions on India, it was, in a way, a sense of leverage for Donald Trump to go in this conversation, to go in this summit, and, have some sort of a leverage, some sort of a bargaining leverage as far as his side is concerned?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, my colleague is correct. India and the United States are critical strategic partners. I believe, yes, there probably was something of that. I wouldn't be surprised if Putin came to the table because Prime Minister Modi said to him, hey, we're not going to need all this money to support you. However, I think what's important here is, again, since they are friends and strategic partners, there's going to, one way or another, they're going to find some way to get around this if Putin won't make a deal. Whether it's a carve out, whether it's a transitional period, whether it's a matter of how we can replace Russian oil with U.S. or some other allies' oil, one way or another, they're going to make a deal. Well, you brought up China. I think what's particularly critical for China is if these sanctions go into effect. Let's remember, most large economies, such as the United States, such as India, their GDP is made up in the 60 percentiles of domestic market. China's is only something like 37%. They depend on exports. They depend on the income they get for exports. And if they're hit with these big tariffs, if they are not able to access the enormous U.S. consumer market, their economy, which is on life support as it is right now, is going to be worse. And at the same time, it's also important to know that President Trump is well aware that if he does anything that appears to reward Vladimir Putin for his adventure by supporting his land claims, that's a signal to China that he's going to do the same thing if they go after Taiwan. So there are high stakes here. And again, I hope I'm wrong. I don't see the ceasefire coming out of it. But I do see that if it doesn't, that these sanctions will be put on. And one way or another, India is going to come out all right.
Okay, we'll talk about India's position a little bit more. Stay with us. Let's take a look at what is the conversation that is taking place at this moment.
You're not killing any more civilians.
Come on, guys.
Mr. President, President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now? After
Thank you, press.
We've got to go. Thank you, press.
Thank you, press.
Thank you, ceasefire. Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
Well, there seems to be a lot of commotion there, a lot of questions being thrown at the Russian president. Alison, break it down for us. What should have the Russian president answered?
I think that the U.S. and Russia need to talk to each other. We've discussed already that there's both domestic constraints on Putin, there's domestic constraints on Trump. In a realism sort of way, you can trust somebody else that you're negotiating with if you know that you have complementary interests in cooperating, or both have something to lose should one of you back off on what you've committed to. So in that sense, it would depend very much on the architecture of the deals and things like that. And the key is going to be, can both sides find things that benefit them, that allow both leaders to present and save face to their domestic population? And can they put safeguards in place where if another party were to try and back out of the deal, that they would have to suffer some sort of consequence for not following through?
You know, I genuinely hope that this is not the tone of the conversation between the two delegations there. That's Having said that, let's focus on India's position. Alison, India has very clearly maintained a neutral stance here when it comes to United States, as well as continuing its trade with Russia. This includes energy trade and the defense ties. How should India be looking at this in terms of that? Because how is India going to gain out of this these particular talks? Should India be also worried that if at all these talks fall apart, that is going to come and hurt India as well?
So The advantage that India has in this particular situation, and is unique to India and maybe two or three other countries in the world, is that they are large enough and big enough that they can talk to the US and talk to Russia with a level of weight that most countries can't, where they are more subject to the whims of Russia and DC than others. In terms of, it's going to come down to what India needs. I think they were targeted in part because, yes, they purchase Russian oil, and that is what is helping the economy stay afloat. But to Dr. Benkin's point, if the US, for example, could say, hey, we can sell you discounted oil at the same price or lower, buy from us, there's no reason why India couldn't do that. Because at the end of the day, given how much India depends on oil imports at the current moment in time, it's really about how much does it cost, because the less you can pay to meet your needs, the better off you are with a business deal. And in that sense, I think India has shown time and again that they're very pragmatic with their diplomatic relationships. They understand the limitations that come with kind of trying to do that middle of the road approach to countries. But at the same time, that also gives them an opportunity to negotiate and try to get terms that are more beneficial for whatever their needs may be, either in terms of defense or investment or oil and imports or whatever you have.
Benkin, how should India be reading the possible impact of this particular meeting, especially on the India-US tariff negotiations?
You talking to me?
Yes, this is for you,
Okay.
Dr. Benkin.
Sorry. I think those negotiations are going to go forward. Exactly the form it takes will depend on what happens with the United States and Russia. No doubt for India, seeing good relations between the United States and Russia is something beneficial, and I think they can take a lot of credit for that if that happens. However, I think we want to keep something else in mind. And here's a vulnerability the United States has vis-a-vis India. For the last several months at least, there has been a market transition whereby many American companies have been moving out of China and into India. For instance, I just got a new iPhone, and when I got it, I said to the person, "I'll bet it's made in India," because India now, not China, is the greatest source of iPhones to the United States. We're starting to see a lot of that change. If India is faced with all sorts of penalties, if the American companies that now set up in India are faced with all sorts of penalties, that's going to create even more dislocation than putting the secondary tariffs on China and not giving them the same sort of access they were used to the American consumer market. I think those trade negotiations will go on. I think they'll go on well. I think one way or another, India is going to be able to demand a fair deal. And I think they're going to get it. And I think President Trump, as well as Prime Minister Modi, are going to be very happy with that.
Alison, you agree to what Dr. Benkin said? Also, if these talks, they are successful, do you think the bettering of the ties between US and Russia, do you think it is going to complicate or strengthen India's balancing act? How do you look at it?
I don't necessarily think it will complicate India's balancing act because the issue will come from what are the U.S. strategic interests and what are the Russia's strategic interests. And there's plenty of other locations in the world where they come head to head or that are seen as slightly more valuable. Where India has been strategic to the United States is with the Indo-Pacific strategy and how they're dealing with China. So in that sense, the future of U.S.-Chinese relations, I think, will also factor into the U.S.-India relationship. And it can't just be defined by how the U.S. and Russia are working, but you also have the Chinese component to that. And then with the U.S.-Russia angle, all of the other places in the world where the U.S. and Russia either have competing interests or common interests, like Middle East, Syria, Israel issues, South Caucasus that have been going on, Venezuela, and so many moving pieces with this really important bilateral relationship that India is one of the key components. But there's so many moving parts that there's a lot of variables that could impact how India comes out of this. But in general, they should be okay because they're not the primary target.
Okay, Dr. Benkin, I also want to talk about, Donald Trump's ambitions, personal ambitions, especially with respect to the Nobel Peace Prize. How much of this particular summit is about Trump's personal political legacy, including the talks about the Nobel Peace Prize versus genuine conflict resolution?
Well, I think it would be foolish to discount that factor entirely. I do believe, however, that if anyone is expecting Donald Trump to basically give Vladimir Putin a store so he can say, look, I ended this war and now give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I think that would be rather foolish. And as I said, it would be foolish to discount that. I want to mention something else on the last. Besides, I have to say, I think Ms. Frederica was absolutely correct in what she said. I will also mention that India is poised to become the Asian giant, economically, militarily, and you don't do that by tying yourself to a dying power like Russia, demographically, economically, or even seeing militarily. They're in trouble. But in fact, you develop that stronger relationship with a rising power, which seems to be the United States at this point. So again, I think whatever happens today, India is going to be able to play its hand very, very well. And I think when Prime Minister Modi visited the United States not long ago, and President Trump said, he's a tougher negotiator than I am, I think that was a compliment. I think that was rather accurate. I think India is going to come out very well with this, and India will emerge some point as the dominant power in Asia.
All right. Dr. Richard Benkin and Alison Federica, thank you very much for breaking it down for us, for explaining all of this.